Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Hadith 375, about when you are feeling drowsy or sleepy during the prayer. From Aisha, the Prophet said, إِذَا نَعَسَ أَحَدُكُمْ فِي الصَّلَاةِ فَلْيَرْقُدْ حَتَّى يَذْهَبَ عَنْهُ النَّوْمُ فَإِنَّ أَحَدَكُمْ إِذَا صَلَّى وَهُوَ نَاعِسٌ لَعَلَّهُ يَذْهَبُ يَسْتَغْفِرُ فَيَسُبَّ نَفْسَهُ. When one of you is feeling drowsy in the prayer, then let him go to sleep so as to remove the drowsiness. Because it could be that one of you enters into the prayer whilst he is drowsy and he begins to seek forgiveness but ends up abusing his own self. So from this hadith what we learn is that you don't pray when you are feeling drowsy, and that the Sharia has given you permission to take a rest. And in fact, just like the safar and the matar, the travel and the rain, an-nu'as or drowsiness is one of the causes which can enable you to join the prayers. So if you have to go to sleep to remove the drowsiness and the prayer time runs out, no problem, you can actually pray with the other prayer and join the prayers, combine them. So the Dhuhr and Asr and the Maghrib and Isha can be combined. But the point here is that the Sharia gives you permission to go to sleep. Because the point about the Salah is that your mind needs to be clear. You need to know exactly what you are reciting, and also you need to have khushu' in your heart, the tranquility. And this can only happen when you are completely comfortable in your prayer. You have no distractions. And from the distractions is your drowsiness. Some scholars have said that this hadith applies to the nawafil prayers in the night time, the Salatul Layl, because this would be the time when you are most likely to be feeling drowsy, not during the daytime. Hence this hadith applies to the Salatul Layl, the nawafil in the night time. However, when we look at the hadith, the wording is general. The word fis salah, in the salah, is used. So the salah means any salah. As long as it is a salah, then this hadith applies to this salah, and that seems to be the apparent meaning of the hadith. Hadith 376. The fadila of the Quran. From Aisha, she says that the Prophet heard somebody reciting the Quran in the masjid, and the Prophet said, Rahimahullah, لَقَدْ أَذْكَرَنِي آيَةً كُنْتُ أُنْسِيتُهَا. May Allah have mercy on him. He reminded me of an ayah which I was made to forget. So we take from this hadith that you are allowed to say Rahimahullah to somebody who is alive, because normally we find it heard being said about somebody who is dead. We can also take that the one who is more virtuous can be listening to the recitation of the one who is less virtuous, just as in the hadith here. Also we have the evidence that Ibn Mas'ud recited Surah An-Nisa to the Prophet, so the Prophet listened to Ibn Mas'ud. We can also take that even the Prophet could be made to forget an ayah of the Quran, and so you're not sinful if you forget an ayah of the Quran. And also, you should not say, I forgot the ayah of the Quran, because then it gives this idea that you are not interested in the Quran, or that the Quran does not hold much status in your heart, because normally you forget things which you don't care much about. So this is not good form of speech when it comes to talking about the ayahs of the Quran. Rather, you would say, I was made to forget the ayah of the Quran. So many ulama have said that for you to say Nasitu ayat al-Quran, or I forgot an ayah of the Quran, is lightly makruh, and it gives the idea that you are heedless of the Quran. And this is a trait of the kuffar, of course. Allah Jalla wa Ala says, كَذَلِكَ أَتَتْكَ آيَاتُنَا فَنَسِيتَهَا فَكَذَلِكَ الْيَوْمَ تُنْسَى. Thus did our ayat come to you, but you made nisyan of them, so today you are left alone. So nasitaha, you left them. So you left them alone or abandoned them. This is what nisyan can also be. Also in the same chapter, the Prophet said, لا يقل أحدكم نسيت آية كيت وكيت بل هو نسي. One of you should not say, I forgot such and such an ayah, but rather, he was made to forget. So this is where we derive the ruling that it is makruh to use such wordings, because it is not good form, and it is not good etiquettes with regards to talking about the Quran. Rather you say, nussitu or unsitu, I was made to forget. So the doer is not you anymore. And hadith number 377, from Abu Hurairah, the Prophet said, تعاهدوا هذا القرآن فوالذي نفس محمد بيده لهو أشد تفلتا من الإبل في عقلها. Keep reviewing the Quran, meaning keep in contact and in touch with it, because by the one who has the soul of Muhammad in his hand, this Quran is severer in slipping away from you than the camel from his tying rope. So we find then that the camel easily slips away from the tying rope if you have not tied it properly, or if you have not tied the camel at all, it will easily slip away from you. And then lo and behold, you have lost your camel. The Prophet here is saying that the Quran is even more severe in slipping away from you, so you can yet more easily lose the ayat of the Quran which you had once memorized. Therefore, make ta'ahud, keep in regular contact with it. So keep yourself regularly concerned with it. This order would be an obligation for the one who forgets easily, and a recommendation for the one who does not forget easily. But either way, what you have memorized from the Quran, you must keep yourself concerned with it regularly, so you're reciting it regularly. Also, we learn from the hadith that if you want to convey a particular concept, then give a parallel concept which the people can relate to. So here the Prophet gives the concept of the camel running away or slipping away from its tying rope. This is something the people can relate to. Also, we find from the narration that you're allowed to take an oath when nobody has asked you to take an oath. And this could be done to emphasize an extremely important matter. Hadith 378, about beautifying your voice in reciting the Quran. From Abu Hurairah, the Prophet said, مَا أَذِنَ اللَّهُ لِشَيْءٍ مَا أَذِنَ لِنَبِيٍّ يَتَغَنَّى بِالْقُرْآنِ. The word أَذِنَ could be pronounced أَذَنَ or أَذِنَ. So you could have a kasra on the dhal or the fatha on the dhal. If we pronounce it as adhina, it would translate to Allah has not permitted anything in the same way He has permitted a prophet to sing the recitation. The Quran here cannot be referring to the Quran in the Mus'haf, because the only prophet who has recited the Quran in the Mus'haf is the last prophet, whereas this hadith is speaking about any and all prophets. So the Quran here is simply qira'ah or recitation. So this would be the recitation which the prophets would recite from their scripture. Yataghanna is from ghina, which means to sing. So it is when you beautify the voice. And you don't just recite it like you would be reading a newspaper or some other storybook. If we pronounce the word adhana, then it means to hear. So it is to use your udhun, which is your ears. So it would be that Allah does not listen to anything in the same way He listens to a prophet singing the recitation from the scripture. And both meanings are understandable. Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah spoke negatively of those people who spend and focus all their efforts to perfecting the tajweed, which would then distract them from tadabbur or pondering and reflecting over the Quran, because ultimately, the reason for the Quran is pondering over it and reflecting over it, not necessarily reciting it in a beautiful voice or with immensely good tajweed. So if this tajweed of yours distracts you from the tadabbur, then this is no good, because you're doing something of secondary importance and leaving out that which is of primary importance. When you are reciting the Quran, what is obligatory is that you pronounce the letters properly, because if you do not pronounce the letters properly, you change the meaning. And this is not a trivial affair. In another wording of the same chapter, the wording is يَتَغَنَّ بِالْقُرْآنِ يَجْهَرُ بِهِ, singing the Quran, raising his voice thereby. So when you recite the Quran, it should not be silently, rather it should be out aloud, at least with a decent enough loud voice that you can hear yourself. Of course, if you're going to distract other people, then you need to be considerate. But generally, the rule is that the Quran should not be recited silently, as you might read a newspaper, for example. Rather, it should be recited out aloud. And in beautifying the voice, it should not be exaggerated such that you resemble a singer. Because as we know, with singers, it is all about exaggerating the voice and making it musical. That's the whole point about singing. So the Quran is not the same thing. It is not meant to be turned into some sort of pop song. Rather, it is just meant to be so that you beautify your voice, so as to make it different to reciting anything else like a newspaper or a storybook and the like. Also in the same chapter, the Prophet heard one of the companions, Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, recite the Quran, and he came to him and he said, لَوْ رَأَيْتَنِي وَأَنَا أَسْتَمِعُ لِقِرَاءَتِكَ الْبَارِحَةِ لَقَدْ أُوتِيتَ مِزْمَارًا مِنْ مَزَامِيرِ آلِ دَاوُودَ. If only you had seen me when I was listening to you reciting the Quran yesterday, verily you have been granted the beautiful voice from the beautiful voices of the people of Dawood. And this refers to Dawood alayhi salam himself here in this particular hadith. because Dawood alayhi salam used to have a beautiful voice with which he would recite the scripture. The word mizmar can also mean a flute, which is from the instruments of the shaitan, so this is not the intended meaning in this hadith. The intended meaning of mizmar here is simply a beautiful voice. However, it needs to be noted, if somebody is reciting with a beautiful voice but he exaggerates, so for example, he stretches out a particular word, that which should not be stretched out, so this would be like resembling a musical singer, then this is to be rebuked, because this is not the proper way of reciting the Quran. So however beautiful your voice is, it does not give you justification to go to extremes and make it sound like some sort of musical song, by, for example, stretching out certain words which should not be stretched, or joining two words together, the idgham, which should not be joined. We may also take that you can praise a person in front of him as long as there is no danger that he will be filled with self-conceit. Hadith number 379, about the Prophet reciting Surah Al-Fath on the day of the conquest of Mecca, from Muawiyah ibn Qurra. He says, I heard Abdullah ibn Mughaffal say that the Prophet recited Surah Al-Fath in the year of the Fath, meaning the conquest of Mecca, when he was on his way to the conquest and he was riding his animal, and as he was reciting there was an echo in his recitation. So from this narration, can we take that it is permissible to have an echo in your recitation in the Quran? The answer here is definitely no. You are not allowed to have an echo in your recitation. So for example, you could have some recitations in which you can rig the microphone and the speaker such that it produces an echo, and this is easy to do with modern day equipment, and you could do this to produce some sort of musical effect. Now this is an abuse of the Quran. It is not meant to be in this way. You're using the Quran as some sort of musical song now. But this narration clearly tells us that there was an echo in the recitation of the Prophet. Now some have said it's because as the animal was moving up and down, it jogged the Prophet's voice, which produced this echo or repetition effect. However, in the Sunan we authentically have Hani narrating that she was lying on the bed and the Prophet was reciting the Quran making tarjih, that is to say, repeating the words. So it appears then that this was not due to an accident of the animal jogging the Prophet, that this in fact was intentional. So from this it would hold true that you can make tarjih of the Quran just like you make tarjih in the adhan, where you repeat the words. Most people are going to find this strange, but that is only because they are not used to it. However, if you look at the texts, then they do indicate that making tarjih with the recitation of the Quran is permissible. However, this is not the same as having an echoing effect in the microphone, because this is now not the reciter making tarjih. So what we say about the microphone still holds true. Why was the Prophet reciting Surah Al-Fath? Well, in this surah there is the promise that the mu'minun are going to conquer Mecca, and so the Prophet is reciting it because the occasion is appropriate, and he is emphasizing and reminding himself that the promise of Allah Jalla wa Ala is true. Hadith 380, about the sakina or tranquility which descends when you recite the Quran. Al-Bara ibn Azib said that a man recited Surah Al-Kahf in his home and there was an animal there, and the animal started to run away. The man looked up and there seemed to be some sort of cloud which was above him, covering him. And so the man mentioned this to the Prophet, and the Prophet told him, Iqra fulan, recite, O fulan, mentioning him by his name, فَإِنَّهَا السَّكِينَةُ تَنَزَّلَتْ عِنْدَ الْقُرْآنِ أو تَنَزَّلَتْ لِلْقُرْآنِ, because this is the sakina or the tranquility which has descended with the recitation of the Quran or for the recitation of the Quran. When you recite the Quran properly with tadabbur, you will have sakina in your heart, no doubt. And this sakina which he saw in the form of a cloud were the malaika, who came down to listen to him recite the Quran. And this without doubt is a virtue of this man, and the name of this man is Ibn Hudayr. From the other narrations, he saw some clouds which looked like lamps, and the Prophet told him, if you had carried on reciting, these malaika would have remained so that the people could have seen them. Now of course, it doesn't mean that every time you recite the Quran, you would see malaika. Rather, this is a particular fadila of this Sahabi, Ibn Hudayr. But there is no doubt that you will experience sakina in your heart if you recite the Quran with tadabbur. As for if you're just reciting it quickly, paying it the lip service, then do not expect any sakina in your heart. Also, we know that in his house he had a horse, and the horse became agitated. It must have felt some sort of supernatural experience. So we find that animals can experience or feel things which humans cannot. They can react to supernatural events. Hadith 381, about the virtue of the mu'min who also recites the Quran. From Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, the Prophet said, مثل المؤمن الذي يقرأ القرآن مثل الأترجة. The parable of the mu'min who recites the Quran is like that of the citron. ريحها طيب وطعمها طيب. Its smell and its taste are good. ومثل المؤمن الذي لا يقرأ القرآن مثل التمرة لا ريح لها وطعمها حلو. And the parable of the mu'min who does not recite the Quran is like the dried date. It does not have any smell, but it does have good taste. ومثل المنافق الذي يقرأ القرآن مثل الريحانة ريحها طيب وطعمها مر. And the parable of the munafiq who recites the Quran is like the basil. It has a good smell, but it tastes bitter. ومثل المنافق الذي لا يقرأ القرآن كمثل الحنظلة ليس لها ريح وطعمها مر. And the parable of the munafiq who does not recite the Quran is like that of the colocynth plant. It does not have a smell and its taste is bitter. So we can take from this narration then that it is always useful to give parables to make people understand the concept you are trying to explain. Just previously we had the hadith of the camel slipping away from its tying rope. Again, an example or a parable given to make the people understand the concept you're trying to convey, because it could be too abstract for somebody to understand. So with this hadith then, it is clear to understand the difference between the mu'min and the munafiq, and from those who recite the Quran and the ones who do not recite the Quran. The uturujja, the citron fruit, has a nice smell, so it outwardly appears good, but it also has a nice taste, so it inwardly appears good. The tamra, the dried date, of course it does not have a smell, so it does not outwardly appear good, just like the mu'min who does not recite the Quran, but inwardly there is much goodness. The rayhana, the basil flower, it has a very fresh smelling scent, so it's nice to smell, but inwardly it is bitter, just like the munafiq who recites the Quran. Then we have the colocynth flower, which does not have a smell, but it does have a bitter taste. So this is like the munafiq who does not recite the Quran. Then hadith 382, the one who is skilled at reciting the Quran and the one who is not skilled. From Aisha, the Prophet said, الماهر بالقرآن مع السفرة الكرام البررة والذي يقرأ القرآن ويتتعتع فيه وهو عليه شاق له أجران. The skilled reciter of the Quran will be with the noble and virtuous angels, but the one who stutters in his recitation, he will have 2 rewards. This hadith tells us that in all people who recite the Quran, there is goodness, whether you are an expert at recitation or whether you're a complete beginner. As for if you're an expert at reciting the Quran, then you will be with the safara, these are the travelers, or we could say the messengers, the kiram, the honored, and barara, from bir, the one who obey Allah Jalla wa Ala. So this type of person will be in their company. And of course this is an extreme virtue, and it encourages us to become skilled at reciting the Quran. But if you're a beginner, you might make tata'tu, which is the taraddud, when you have to repeat it over and over again to get it right. So the hadith tells us that this type of person will have a double-fold reward. Firstly, for reciting the Quran, and secondly, for enduring the difficulty. We can take also that when you have to endure some hardship in performing acts of worship, then your hardship will not go unnoticed, rather you will be rewarded for this hardship as long as you have not intentionally brought this hardship on yourself, because there is no virtue in this. So if you have to make wudu with cold water, for example, and this is obviously very hard, you will be rewarded with this. But if you intentionally put the water in the fridge and then make wudu from it so as to cause you hardship, then there is no virtue in that. So if you have a choice to make wudu from either cold water or hot water, then you choose the appropriate temperature which will be comfortable for you. Hadith number 383. The more virtuous reciting the Quran to the one who is less virtuous. From Anas, he says that the Prophet said to Ubay ibn Ka'b, إن الله أمرني أن أقرأ عليك لم يكن الذين كفروا قال وسماني لك قال نعم قال فبكى. The Prophet said to Ubay ibn Ka'b that Allah has ordered me that I should recite to you لم يكن الذين كفروا, meaning Surah Al-Bayyinah. Ubay asked, did Allah name me to you? Meaning, did He mention me by name? The Prophet said yes, and to that Ubay ibn Ka'b cried. So from this we can take, just as the title says, that the one more virtuous can recite to the one less virtuous. Normally you might expect the one who is more skilled at reciting the Quran to listen to the one who is less skilled so that he could correct him. But there's no problem in doing it the other way around, because reciting the Quran and listening to the Quran are both in and of themselves virtuous actions, so it could be done by anyone, by the one who is more superior at reciting the Quran or less superior at reciting the Quran. It can be done both ways around. From this narration we pick up the manqaba, or the good quality or virtuous quality of Ubay ibn Ka'b, in that Allah Jalla wa Ala ordered the Prophet to recite to Ubay ibn Ka'b the Quran. Not just that, but another virtue is that Allah Jalla wa Ala named him. And it would be an incredible honor that Allah Jalla wa Ala, the creator of the heavens and the earth, should name you. It would be an honor and a humbling experience. In fact, in the next narration, we find Abdullah ibn Mas'ud reciting to the Prophet. And this is analogous to narrating hadith. It could be the teacher narrates the hadith to the students, and it can also be that the students recite the hadith to their teacher. Both ways used to be done, just like with the Quran that we are witnessing with these narrations. So this is an interesting analogy to pick up. Also, a couple of other points. Is it a major sin to forget the Quran? And we are here referring to the narration which tells us not to say, I forgot the Quran, but rather, I was made to forget the Quran. Because there are some narrations which say that it is a great sin to forget the Quran. But we say no, it is not a great sin to forget the Quran, especially if you happen to forget it and you were not negligent. However, if a person is negligent and forgets the Quran, then this resembles turning away from the Quran, which is a blameworthy trait. Also pertaining to the narration about keeping in touch with the Quran because it escapes quicker than a camel escaping its tying rope, then we have an authentic narration in the Sunan where the Prophet told Amr ibn al-As to recite the Quran in 1 month. And he said, no, he can do more. Then the Prophet said, well then 7 days. He said, no, I can do more. Then the Prophet said, well then 3 days. And he said, no, I can do more. And then the Prophet said that the one who recites it in less than 3 days has not understood it. Because normally you're reciting it so quickly, you would not have the opportunity to ponder over what you are reciting. This is normally the case. Hadith 384, about crying when listening to the Quran. The Prophet said to Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, Iqra' alayya, recite the Quran to me. And Ibn Mas'ud says, should I recite to you, but it was revealed to you, so you should be reciting to me, should you not? And the Prophet replied, Inni uhibbu an asma'ahu min ghayri, I like to listen to it from other than me, meaning from someone else. And so Ibn Mas'ud recited from the beginning of Surah An-Nisa until he reached the ayah, فَكَيْفَ إِذَا جِئْنَا مِنْ كُلِّ أُمَّةٍ بِشَهِيدٍ وَجِئْنَا بِكَ عَلَى هَؤُلَاءِ شَهِيدًا. So how will it be when we bring a witness from every ummah and we bring you as a witness over these people? That is ayah 41 of An-Nisa. And at that point the Prophet started to cry. Also in the chapter from Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, some of his companions asked him, recite the Quran to us, and he recited Surah Yusuf to them. One of the people in the gathering said, it was not revealed like this. And Abdullah ibn Mas'ud replied to him, woe to you, by Allah, I recited this surah to the Prophet and he told me, Ahsant, you did well. And Ibn Mas'ud says that whilst I was speaking to him, I smelt the smell of khamr from him, and I asked him, have you been drinking khamr and you are belying the Quran, meaning you are saying that it was not revealed like this? I will surely whip you. And he whipped him, the had punishment. So we can take from these narrations that even if you are more virtuous, you can ask somebody less virtuous to recite the Quran to you, And this is from the mannerisms of the Prophet and the people of knowledge as well, that they are humble even towards their own followers and students. We can find that crying whilst listening to the Quran is perfectly permissible, as long as the cause for this crying is the khushu' and the tadabbur that you feel towards the Quran, and it also shows you to have a soft heart. In the narration it says that when the Prophet started to cry, he said to Ibn Mas'ud, "Hasbuk, this is enough for you." Not because the Prophet did not want to listen to the Quran anymore, but rather his emotions became too strong as he started to cry, so he needed a break. Also notice that he did not tell Abdullah ibn Mas'ud to say Sadaqallahu al-Azim when he finished reciting the Quran, and so this sentence which the people utter when they finish reciting the Quran is a bid'ah, because they practice it as if it was a sunnah, and it is not a sunnah, and people will start to think that this is the sunnah. Therefore it must not be done. It makes no difference whether it's true or not, because it is true, yes, Allah has spoken the truth in the Quran without doubt, but there's a difference between that and uttering these words every time you finish reciting the Quran as if it was sunnah. It is not sunnah. And yes, it's true, Allah Jalla wa Ala does say in the Quran, قُلْ صَدَقَ اللَّهِ, say Allah has spoken the truth, but this does not mean that you say it every time you finish reciting the Quran. The Prophet will be brought as a shaheed, as a witness against the people that he has delivered the message, so that the people will have no excuse that the message did not reach them. Also from the other narration, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud whipped this person who had the smell of khamr coming from his mouth. So this would prove that he has been drinking khamr. He whipped him. It would imply that Ibn Mas'ud had some political authority over these people. Now, are you allowed to whip somebody for drinking khamr just because you smell the khamr from his mouth? There's a difference of opinion here, because some ulama say, no, it may be that he was forced to drink khamr, or it may be that he drank it forgetfully, or perhaps he drank this drink thinking it was halal, but actually it was khamr. So there are possibilities of this sort, and so because of this, they would carry the hadith on the meaning that this man acknowledged that yes, he did drink khamr, and that there is no excuse for him. This is why he was whipped. And also notice that the word had is used in the Arabic of this narration, and there's a difference of opinion as to whether this punishment is a had punishment or not. The weightier opinion is that it is not a had punishment, rather it is a ta'zir punishment, which can be changed. So the number of flogs could be increased or decreased in accordance with the ijtihad of the Imam. Hadith number 385, about the virtue of reciting the Quran after the Fatiha in the Salaah. From Abu Hurairah, the Prophet asks his companions, أَيُحِبُّ أَحَدُكُمْ إِذَا رَجَعَ إِلَى أَهْلِهِ أَنْ يَجِدَ فِيهِ ثَلَاثَ خَلِفَاتٍ عِظَامٍ سِمَانٍ? Should one of you love that when he returns to his family to find 3 fat pregnant camels? They said yes. So the Prophet replied, فَثَلَاثُ آيَاتٍ يَقْرَأُ بِهِنَّ أَحَدُكُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِ خَيْرٌ لَهُ مِنْ ثَلَاثِ خَلِفَاتٍ عِظَامٍ سِمَانٍ. But 3 ayat which one of you recites in the Salah is better for him than 3 fat pregnant camels. So right away from this hadith we can take the virtue of reciting the Quran after Al-Fatiha in the Salah, and the great reward there is for you in that. And when we talk about an ayah here, the ulama have said that it must be an ayah which has a meaning in and of itself. So for example, Alif Lam Mim, though it is an ayah, officially, it does not have a meaning in and of itself. So it should have a meaning in and of itself. This would be an ayah for you to be eligible for this reward. Though the wording of the hadith is general, but it is better to be on this safe side here. Now notice that in another narration of this chapter, it says that 2 ayat which you recite are better than 2 camels. So it appears the relationship is 1 ayah is better than a fat pregnant camel. So in this there's a recommendation to recite ayat of the Quran after Al-Fatiha. Of course it is permissible to recite no ayat after Al-Fatiha. You can go straight into the ruku' and your salah will be perfectly valid. But if you want to bag this reward of the fat pregnant camel, then you ought to recite an ayah which is independent with its meaning. Hadith 386, the virtue of Surah Al-Baqarah and the virtue of the Quran as well, From Abu Umama al-Bahili, he says, I heard the Prophet say, اقرأوا القرآن فإنه يأتي يوم القيامة شفيعا لأصحابه. Recite the Quran, for it will be an intercessor for its companion on يوم القيامة. اقرأوا الزهراوين البقرة وسورة آل عمران. Recite the two radiant things, Al-Baqarah and Ali Imran. فإنهما يأتيان يوم القيامة كأنهما غمامتان أو كأنهما غيايتان أو كأنهما فرقان من طير صواف تحاجان عن أصحابهما. اقرأوا سورة البقرة فإن أخذها بركة وتركها حسرة ولا تستطيعها البطلة. Because these two surah will come on Yawm al-Qiyamah as if they are two clouds, or as if they are two canopies. So they will cover the reciter of this surah, and they will argue for its companion and recite Surah Al-Baqarah, because taking this surah is a barakah and leaving it off is a cause of grief, and the magicians are not able to overcome this surah. So from this narration we find the virtue of reciting the Quran. It will be an intercessor for you on Yawm al-Qiyamah. Of course it could argue against you as well if you did not follow it. As the Prophet said, Al-Qur'anu hujjatul laka aw alayk. The Quran is an evidence for you or against you. The Quran is a recitation, so how can it come on Yawm al-Qiyamah to argue for you? Would it have to be some sort of body? Well, the answer is it could be. We don't know. We cannot make an analogy. We know that death will come in the form of a ram on Yawm al-Qiyamah and it will be sacrificed. So death will die. And so this is why the people of Jannah will be there forever and the people of fire will be in there forever. It will be said to each of those inhabitants, خُلُودٌ وَلَا مَوْتٌ. Forever you will be and there will be no death. We learn from this hadith the virtue of Al-Baqarah and Ali Imran. They will shade their companion and they will argue for their companion on Yawm al-Qiyamah. Also a specific virtue of Al-Baqarah, to take it is barakah. It is a blessing, it is a means of goodness for you. But to leave it off is hasra, is a means of grief. And the magicians are not able to counteract this. So this is an effective surah against the effects of magic. Also, an interpretation of this could be that the magicians are unable to recite this surah because they are so deviated, and this surah is only for the guided people. You could also interpret it as that the magicians cannot reproduce the like of it, which is the Quranic challenge as we know it. And Allah knows best. And we find in Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah says, وَمَا هُمْ بِضَارِّينَ بِهِ مِنْ أَحَدٍ إِلَّا بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. And they, meaning the magicians, were not able to harm anyone except with the permission of Allah. Also we can take that the end of this hadith rhymes. And you can make your speech rhyming as long as you don't go out of your way to make it rhyme. And as long as you don't compromise the meaning of the speech just in order to make your speech rhyme. Notice in the hadith, the Prophet calls Baqarah and Ali Imran Zahrawain. It comes from Zahra, which means to be radiant or to shine. This is because these surahs have much light in them. They shine, they have much reward in them. And this is the light of guidance we are talking about. So these are two great surahs in the Quran. Hadith 387, the virtue of Al-Fatiha and the end of Surah Al-Baqarah. From Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, the Prophet said, الآيتان من آخر سورة البقرة من قرأهما في ليلة كفتاه. Two ayat from the end of Surah Al-Baqarah. Whoever recites it in a night, they will be sufficient for him. And another narration of the chapter, the Prophet was sitting with Jibreel alayhi salam when he heard a noise of a door when it opens. He raised his head and Jibreel said to the Prophet, this is a door which has opened in the heaven and it has never been opened before. And another angel descended, and Jibreel said that this is an angel who has descended to the earth. He has never descended to the earth before. This angel said salam, and he told the Prophet, rejoice with two lights which have been given to you, and no Prophet has been given this before you. What are these two lights? Fatihatul Kitab, the Surah Al-Fatiha, and the Khawatimu Surah Al-Baqarah, the end ayat of the Surah Al-Baqarah. You will not recite even a letter from these two except that you will be given it, meaning you will be given its reward. So we can take from both of these narrations the virtue of Surah Al-Fatiha. There has been nothing quite like it before given to any prophet, and likewise the end ayat of Surah Al-Baqarah. There is extra virtue in these ayat. So when we talk about specific items which Allah has granted the Prophet, which He did not grant prophets before him, so these are the specialities, if you like, of the last Prophet, then you can add to your list Surah Al-Fatiha and the last ayat of Surah Al-Baqarah. What does it mean when he says that the last 2 ayat of Surah Al-Baqarah will be sufficient for you if you recite it at night? Well, first of all, we could interpret it to mean they will be sufficient for you in giving you protection from shaitan, so from his harms, and also from you being afflicted with any calamity or disaster and the like. So we could broadly say that they will be sufficient for your protection. Some have suggested that they will be sufficient for you for praying the Qiyamul Layl, so that you would not need to wake up for the Qiyamul Layl. But that does not seem to be apparent here. We know the Prophet would regularly stand up for the Qiyamul Layl. Hadith 388. The virtue of Surah Al-Kahf and Ayat Al-Kursi, from Abu Darda, that the Prophet said, من حفظ 10 آيات من أول سورة الكهف عصم من الدجال. Whoever memorizes the first 10 ayat of Surah Al-Kahf, he will be protected from Ad-Dajjal. And in another wording it says, from the end of Surah Al-Kahf. And Hadith 389, from Ubay bin Ka'ab, the Prophet said to him, Ya Abal Munzir, أتدري أي آية من كتاب الله معك أعظم? O Abu al-Munzir, do you know which ayah from the book of Allah is the greatest? I said, Allah and His Messenger know better. And then he repeated the same question. And the second time, Ubay bin Ka'ab says, I replied, Allahu la ilaha illa huwa al-hayyul qayyum. And that is, of course, the Ayat al-Kursi. And the Prophet struck his chest, and he said, May you find much joy with knowledge. So we take from the first of these narrations that Surah Al-Kahf is particularly potent against the Dajjal. And the reason for this is because Ad-Dajjal is going to come with many amazing signs to convert people into believing that he is a deity. But Surah Al-Kahf is a surah which has many signs of Allah Jalla wa Ala, incredible feats being performed. So it's like these signs counteract the signs of Ad-Dajjal. And so the first 10 of Al-Kahf and the last 10 of Al-Kahf would be particularly potent against Ad-Dajjal. In the second of these narrations, we learn that the greatest ayah in the Quran is Ayatul Kursi, which is found in Surah Al-Baqarah. Firstly, it has the greatest name of Allah, Al-Hayyul Qayyum, which when Allah is called upon using this name, He will answer your call. So it is a strong sabab or a cause for your dua to be answered, given that there are no preventative factors involved. So Allah is Al-Hayy, He is the living because He never dies and He never goes to sleep. So His life is perfect. And His life also does not depend on time and space like our life does. He is Al-Qayyum. This could be understood in two ways. He is Qa'im bi nafsih. He exists by Himself, so He does not need anything else to keep Him in existence as we do, of course. For example, we need sunlight, we need oxygen to keep us in existence. But Allah exists by Himself, independently of anything else. He has the perfect Qayyumiyyah. And the second way to interpret this is that He makes others exist. So He makes the other thing Qa'im, or established or upright or in existence. So He makes us exist and the universe exist and so on. What is the Kursi? Well, as the Prophet explained, the Kursi is the place of the foot of Allah Jalla wa Ala. And it's not the same as His Arsh or His throne. What is special about this ayah is that it solely speaks about Allah and praising Him. Just in the same way, Surah Al-Ikhlas is an extremely virtuous surah because it solely speaks about Allah alone. So in the same vein, this ayah solely speaks about Allah alone, giving it an extra great virtue and making it the greatest ayah of the Quran. The ulama say that this ayah, Ayatul Kursi, talks about the descriptions or attributes of Allah Jalla wa Ala. It talks about His wahdaniyah, His oneness. It talks about His haya, His life, about His ilm, His knowledge, about His mulk, His dominion, and that He owns everything, about His qudra, His ability, about His irada, His willpower. These are from the fundamental attributes of Allah Jalla wa Ala. Without these types of attributes, we simply would not know the type of deity we are worshipping. And it makes no sense to worship a deity that you don't know. The greatest surah of the Quran is Al-Fatiha, the 7 often repeated verses. We can also learn from these narrations that the Quran is not the same. Certain parts of the Quran are more virtuous than other parts. In terms of the reward you gain, in terms of the effect it has on your heart, in terms of the eloquence, the Quran is not the same all throughout. It is different, and some parts are more virtuous than other parts in different ways. We can also learn from this hadith that the Prophet praised Ubay bin Ka'ab by saying, "May knowledge take delight with you." So are you allowed to praise somebody else in front of his face? Well, the answer is yes, if you are confident that this praise will not lead to him being arrogant. And so this means you have to know this person fairly well, just as the Prophet knew Ubay bin Ka'ab very well. So the Prophet was confident that this praise would not get the better of Ubay bin Ka'ab. Similarly, we know the Prophet ﷺ praised Salman al-Farisi, where he said that even if Iman was up in the stars, people like him, meaning Salman al-Farisi, would reach it. That's an immense praise. However, the Prophet was confident here that this praise will not get the better of Salman al-Farisi and will not lead to arrogance due to his strong taqwa and knowledge. So if this is the case, then you can praise somebody else. However, the general rule is you need to be careful and not praise him in front of his face, because that will lead to him becoming proud and arrogant. Okay, let's take some review questions. So question number 1. What should you do if you are so drowsy in the Salah that you cannot concentrate on what you are saying? Question number 2. Why is it not permissible to say, "I forgot some ayat of the Quran"? Question number 3. Why is Ayatul Kursi the greatest ayah of the Quran?